Good afternoon, everybody. As this morning's proceedings were broadcast, these will be broadcast by voice only after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event being spoken about. Those with mobile devices may use them to speak to the outside world about what they've heard in the hearing, but only after 10 minutes have elapsed. They may not be used for recording or photography.
Thank you, sir. Alison, I want to now move on to ask you some questions about Mark Jenner's reporting. We've touched upon this on occasions before the break this morning. You have already said that there doesn't appear to be any reporting about you in his reporting. And that's despite the fact that you have said yourself that you were an active member in the Colin Roach Centre, particularly in 1996. Is that right?
Yeah.
You attended the CRC meetings together with Mark Jenner, is that right?
Yeah.
Did he also attend meetings without you?
Yes.
His explanation for the lack of reporting on you, paragraph 224 of his statement, is that he only included information on key activists or participants, and she, that's referring to you, was neither of these. Do you have any particular comment on that? Did you consider yourself a key activist or participant in Colin Roach Centre events and meetings?
I considered myself an active participant. What I think is perhaps more interesting for me is that it differs from the reporting and the evidence that we've heard from lots of undercover police officers who say they were hoovering up intelligence about everybody. So when it suddenly became, who sent and when did the memo get received that they were only to report on key activists? I don't know what he means by key activists. It seems to me he means men, largely. It doesn't quite add up because my understanding is what did one of them say? That all intelligence is good intelligence. Not all intelligence is evidence, but they wanted to hoover up intelligence about everybody. So it doesn't quite add up as an explanation.
Yes, and at paragraph 6.2 of your statement, you say you regularly spoke at meetings when they related to issues which were important to you, such as education or anti-fascism. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm sure I would have done. I'm sure I would have talked about being Jewish. I'm sure we talked about the 43 group. I mean, Mark and I, as I put in my statement, we went to Centerprise in Dalston to hear Maurice Beckman talk about his autobiography about the 43 group, which was an anti-fascist group after the war. So I would have spoken about that, and I would have definitely spoken about issues relating to schools and education.
Do you think others at the CRC would have described you as a key activist or participant in the centre?
I'm not sure what key means. I mean, yeah, I was definitely an active participant for a good couple of years.
Thank you. You also point out that where he states at paragraph 185 of his statement, I was hoovering up information on everyone in the groups I was involved in and providing it all to the SDS. That's rather a contradiction with what he's just said about you, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my earlier point, yeah.
Why do you think it is that you don't appear in the reporting the inquiry has? Is that him trying to hide the relationship with you?
I think it's partly him trying to hide the relationship with me, but I suspect also there's a lot of information and a lot of reporting that's been shredded.
I see. And you think it's both, do you?
Yeah.
At paragraph 6.4, you deal with two particular reports of events that I just want to ask you a little more about, please. And you say that you feel more certain that you were present at these, but nevertheless you don't appear in the intelligence reports.
Yeah.
Can we look, please, at MPS 0245625? So this is at tab C42 of HN15's bundle, and it's a report on a CRC conference held at the Halkevi Centre on the 28th of October 1995 to launch Resistance. What do you remember of that conference?
I mean, I remember not a lot, if I'm honest. I know it happened. I remember a lot of the conversations around Resistance in the build-up. I don't want to minimise the more serious activities of some of the members of the Colin Roach Centre. I don't include myself in this. But it often felt to me a little bit like, particularly after we found out we'd been spied on, a little bit like Citizen Smith, the People's Republic of Tooting, that we had ideas slightly bigger than our capacity, or much bigger than our capacity. So I was in two minds about Resistance. I did feel it was a bit like a political party, but I think I was at that. I kind of think I went to that event. Can I remember much about it? Not really, but I think I was probably there.
Could we just look at the second page, please? Thank you. We see there clearly Mark Cassidy, Mark Jenner's cover name is mentioned there, Steve Headley, Mark Metcalf and Celia Stubbs, and then there are various redactions for privacy. You don't appear in this list, so you think that Mark Jenner deliberately left you out?
No, I probably wouldn't. Sorry, I probably wouldn't have spoken in a big meeting like that, a big conference. I probably didn't speak out. I probably didn't contribute.
Thank you. Could we look, please, at MPS 0001422, and that's at tab B6 of the bundle. This is a report on the final meeting of the Colin Roach Centre on the 19th of October 1998. You think you were definitely at this meeting?
I mean, definitely. I think I was there. There's a couple of meetings that are reported like this. There's another one, I don't know whether you'll take us to it, that I would almost say definitely there, where there was quite a big argument about the setting up of Resistance. I kind of feel I was there, yeah, I do. Have I got it in my diary? I don't know, we'd have to cross-reference. But yes, I feel like I was at these meetings.
And this one was relatively significant, wasn't it, given it was the final meeting of the Colin Roach Centre before it closed?
Yes, but it's 98?
Yes.
Where I was not, I'd stepped back. So if I was there, it was really to kind of, make up numbers to be there as part of a vote. I was not particularly engaged.
And we see again at the bottom, Metcalf mentioned, Smith mentioned, 2 privacy redactions. You're not in that list.
No.
Do you think you would have contributed to this meeting?
Possibly, but possibly not. I mean, possibly not.
At paragraph 6.6 of your witness statement, you comment in these terms: among those named by Mark in the report are people who I do not recall speaking very much at meetings, including, and then the 4 privacy redactions. I'm just pausing there. And you say the last of whom seemed to be extremely shy, and I barely ever heard him speak publicly. If you look at the cipher list, and again, be careful not to name them. But
I know who the shy one is.
You know, if you look at the cipher list at paragraph 6.6, you'll see who those 4 people are. And again, without naming them, all 4 of them are men, aren't they?
Yeah.
You continue in that paragraph, my memories of this time are not great, and I cannot say with 100% certainty that I was present, but given the nature of the meeting, the fact that it is recorded in my diary, and that it was attended by all my closest contacts in the CRC, I think it is very likely I was there. Assuming that was the case, I am hardly a wallflower, so I imagine it was likely that I would have contributed at least as much or as little as the people I have named above.
Is this these names on here? Is this at this meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. I think number 1 is actually a woman.
I see, thank you.
I think. But number two, yeah, I never heard him speak, barely. He was very shy. So if that's me, yeah, I think, yes, I would have spoken as much as they did. And if they were there, I probably was there.
At paragraph 6.7, you carry on. In the report on the final meeting of CRC, only 4 men are named. This reflects a pattern that runs through the disclosure that I have seen, which indicates that Mark reported primarily on male members of the groups that he was involved in. This is the case both in who he recorded in the list of attendees at events and who he singled out for personal pro formas in respect of the CRC. This male-dominated reporting does not reflect my memory of the organisation, which had several active female participants. Why do you think it is that, in general, there was less reporting by Mark Jenner on women activists than there were on men?
Because I think he thought they were irrelevant.
Indicative of his attitude, his true attitude.
His attitude to women, yeah. I mean, I can think of 3 in particular who were strong, active women, politically active. And I haven't seen all of the reports on the CRC, but I haven't seen their names mentioned.
Do you have any further comment on Mark Jenner's attitudes towards women or women activists, with the benefit of hindsight, knowing what you do know about him now?
I think one of the officers, I think it might have been Peter Francis, who talked about the use of the word Doris. And I do remember him using that word once about, I think, women police officers. Yeah, I think he was quite old-fashioned, and he had unreconstructed attitudes towards women, I think it's fair to say.
In paragraph 6.8, you comment in particular that while there is a general trend of less reporting on women, I note by way of example that my close friend, Privacy, is named in at least 8 CRC reports, albeit with her name misspelt. We touched on this earlier. You say in 2 of those reports she is named only in order to note the unnecessary personal information of the status of her relationship with Privacy. However, the remaining 6 relate to her political activity, including noting her attendance at meetings. And although Privacy was more involved in the centre's work on immigration support than I was, I think our attendance at meetings would have been roughly equivalent. And I wonder, therefore, why she is named and I am not.
Yeah.
Why do you think she's named and you are not?
I think she's named in relation to her partner, because he was somebody worth, in Mark's view, worth reporting on. And they wanted to collect evidence, intelligence, so-called, on everybody in personal relationships. She was more active in immigration issues, so they were hoovering up information there. And he wanted to write me out. I believe he wanted to write me out of the reports from an early point in his deployment.
Thank you. You make some observations on the tone of the reporting you've seen by Mark Jenner, in particular at paragraphs 6.9 to 6.11 of your statement, and you say that it was sarcastic, judgmental and disparaging. Is that right?
Yes, it was. And in a way, when I think back on those years, one of the things, the left can be very sectarian, and he used to make some of these comments almost at the time with me about, it's quite boring, isn't it? And I agreed sometimes, but seeing them it's one thing having a conversation with somebody who you think's on the same side, and quite another thing when it's written in a report. And I think what we're seeing through these reports is an attitude of disdain and almost dehumanisation, particularly the use of the language wearies. It's like, if you can make them that much other, you can do what you like to them.
Thank you. At paragraph 6.12 to 6.14 of your statement, you give your views on his deployment, his reporting and his involvement in your life, and you say you're disgusted by his deployment and believe it was abhorrent that information about the CRC was obtained and reported by an undercover officer. Can you just expand upon why you say that?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk through the inquiry about the notion of subversion and the idea that the activists who were spied upon were somehow subversive. And I think what we see through these reporting is that actually the people subverting the democracy was these undercover police officers who were steering and impacting on the decisions and the lives of some of the people they were spying on. I was unsurprised by it. I was unsurprised by the spying on the group. I was surprised and shocked by the relationship with me and those close relationships and very close friendships in people's homes that he established. I could go on. It's just my disgust. It's a very strong word, but I kind of have to bring it up again because you can't live with that level of intensity of feeling because we've become almost desensitized to it. We've heard so many of these stories, so many of these officers, and I think it's important to try to remember how appalled I was, how appalled I am by what Mark and his managers did.
And you say it's the fact that he was so embedded in your personal life and in the personal lives of others, so many involved in the CRC, that is so deeply disturbing. Do you still find that level of intrusion deeply disturbing?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I mean, it's, I know we've said these things before, but it's this idea of democracy, the idea of, we bemoan the fact now that we have young people and a populace that is so alienated from politics, and we often put that we talk about the lack of trust in public institutions, but what's happened here is the part, not in total, but in part the reason for this. People were trying to organise politically. They were trying to get together in collectives and make positive change. And what these people did, what this institution of the police did, was create a completely upside-down world where people with a moral code are being seen as the baddies, and the people with no moral code are somehow the ones who are being commended and expected to be given respect in society.
Yes. Do you consider that any reporting at all on the Colin Roach Centre and its members was justified?
No.
I want to look at in a little bit more detail about Mark Jenner's role that he played in the CRC. You've already said that he became an active member of the CRC and he regularly attended meetings, either with you or on his own without you. Is that right?
Yeah.
How active was he within the meetings themselves? Was he outspoken and engaged in them, or was he really just listening?
It was a bit of both. It depended. He positioned himself as a kind of a support, a kind of chorus or support for Mark Metcalfe. When he positioned himself actually with whoever he thought was going to be the most powerful and influential, whoever he thought he was the most significant. And when he came into the Colin Roach Centre, that was Mark Metcalfe. And so he was a bit of a cheerleader for him.
I see. You detail some of the other types of activities that he became involved in the CRC at paragraph 7.2 of your statement. You say he attended regularly CRC meetings and pickets with trade unions, including the RMT, and he wrote articles for CRC publications. Is that right?
Yeah.
Without naming them, and unless we know that you can, like with Mark Metcalfe, did he socialise with CRC members without you present?
Maybe a bit, but not a great deal. A little bit.
And in terms of the type of role he undertook within the organisation itself, you say at paragraph 7.4, I can't recall if he took any positions at the CRC such as treasurer, but he became a key figure in the organisation. He volunteered for roles, the main one being driver, using his van. He would drive people to events and also transport sound equipment for gigs. And you say you think he also once built a sandwich board put outside the CRC to let members of the public know when they were open. And he also did some carpentry work in the centre at some point too. Is that right? In 1995, 1996, the CRC became affiliated with Anti-Fascist Action, which you've referred to on occasions this morning.
Yeah.
Did Mark Jenner become involved with the AFA at that stage?
I think so, yeah.
And I think you say at paragraph 7.6 that Mark became one of the main delegates from the CRC, and I believe that he volunteered for this role and it was agreed by a vote. So that was a very specific, particular role he took on as a position of responsibility.
Yeah.
Did Mark Jenner, so far as you were aware, attempt to sway the direction of the group, either at the CRC or with, so far as you're aware, at AFA?
I don't know about in AFA. Within the Colin Rote Centre, he put his weight behind positions taken by Mark Metcalfe, which, you know, other people did too, but there were some people who disagreed. But so his contribution was to give an undemocratic imbalance, if you like, because he wasn't really one of the members, but he was a powerful a powerful character around the table for the reasons that I've set out earlier.
Yeah, thank you. Paragraph 7.11, you comment that he wrote his influence out of his reporting. And so, for example, at MPS 0246086, this is a document from March 1996, which sets out the key players in an internal dispute that you've referred to earlier about the resistance group.
Yeah.
And there was a dispute between various people, three people who have privacy redactions, Mark Metcalfe and Steve Headley.
Yeah.
And yet you say this report essentially ignores entirely the contribution that Mark Jenner personally paid to this clash of personalities through supporting Mark Metcalfe's position. Is that right? And that's what you were referring to a moment ago.
That's exactly what I'm referring to, yeah.
You also say at paragraph 7.13 of your statement that he put some people off, such as the anarchists and Labour members, and that he contributed to a dominant male voice in the group. What do you mean by the dominant male voice?
Just that, a dominant working class men's voice, which, you know, I go back to what I said earlier, it was welcomed in some ways as a working class voice. It was quite dominant, and he was a kind of a wingman for Mark Metcalfe during this period. And there were people who I know felt he was, you know, the kind of joint, particularly Mark Jenner, was slightly boorish and not what they'd kind of originally signed up for and moved away.
I see. You also got that can be taken down now. Thank you. You also say at paragraph 7.14 that he also deliberately tried to sow dissent between some of the strong women in the group, and you give a particular example about falsely asserting that a friend of yours and a fellow CRC member had made a pass at him.
Yeah.
Do you have any further comment about that now that you'd like to make?
Well, I just think at the time, I believed him. Of course I did. He told me she made a pass at him. I had a complete go at her. We fell out. I mean, our friendship was never really the same until many, many years later after this all came out. And then I met up with her and talked to her about this, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to move on to ask you just some questions about the trip that we referred to briefly this morning to Belfast and Derry.
Yeah.
You deal with this at paragraph 7.15 to 7.20 initially of your statement. And you say that Mark Jenner volunteered to drive you and some of the group to the West Belfast Festival, or FLA, which you say reassured you and convinced you to go.
Yes.
Why did you need reassuring? What were the concerns?
Because it's not you know, it's not my politics. I don't know about it. I didn't know about it enough. I had a kind of general sort of Paul McCartney, give Ireland back to the Irish. That was about the level of my knowledge and understanding, if I'm honest. I was nervous. My close friend, who we've mentioned earlier, she wasn't going. And I think and I had a bit of FOMO, I had a bit of fear of missing out. I thought if Mark was going, you know, with this group, there were a couple of women involved, I wanted to go. And I, you know, Mark Metcalfe was, I think, correct in saying, you know, this is not political tourism. We're going to show solidarity. We're going to understand about community organising. We're going to understand about community resistance from police brutality. And the thinking behind it was that the way the police and the state operate in the north of Ireland would be the way that they would operate on the mainland in a time of crisis. So we were going to understand. It was political education and a solidarity trip. But I absolutely would not have gone if Mark had not been driving. And
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have gone had he not been there?
No.
The trip was from the 9th to the 15th of August in 1995, and you went to Belfast, and then you also went to Derry, and I believe you stayed with Steve Headley's mother, is that right?
Yeah.
Was Steve Headley there as well?
Yeah.
So far as you know, was Mark Jenner involved in any disorder whilst he was there on that trip?
Well, I remember there was one evening, I think it was in Belfast, I think something was happening, and I remember them saying, you're staying here, you're not coming with us. So maybe there was disorder that night, yeah.
And if we could just look at UCPI 37959, please. It's at tab A73 of the bundles. That's a picture of Mark Jenner showing the camera a bruise on his torso.
Yeah.
Do you believe that he got that in some form of disorder on this trip?
Yeah.
Did he ever say anything to you about being kicked in the head?
No.
You say at paragraph 7.28 of your statement that whilst in Belfast, he drove you all down the Shankhill Road, a Loyalist area.
Yes.
And at 7.29, he also went there on foot to take photographs of the murals.
Yeah.
And at 7.31, he engaged someone from Republican Sinn Féin in conversation.
Yeah.
You go on to say at 7.32, he then started to take an interest in Irish politics, and via the building workers group became involved in Republican Forum.
Yeah.
At 7.33, you say he took you to a pub in Islington at which you were uncomfortable because a drunk stood on a table shouting continuity IRA. 7.34, he attended some Saoirse events, and at 7.35, he claimed to have received a death threat by telephone at 3 o'clock one morning. I don't need to go into any particular further details about those events, but I do just want to ask you about risk, if I may. Knowing what you do now, that Mark Jenner was, of course, an undercover Metropolitan Police officer at those times during those events, how do you feel about the nature of the risks he may have been exposing you to by, for example, taking you to Belfast, acting in the manner he did and associating with the people he did in this field?
It's difficult because I appreciate I was ideologically naive and I had a degree of free will. I know I was influenced heavily by him, but I chose to go. I don't think I would have gone without him. When we were there, I'm not sure we were at that much risk. I mean, we did, I did get kind of dragged off the Derry walls by the RUC. I think out of all of these, the biggest risk, particularly given what he says about why he started a relationship with me, is the death threat to my landline. That death threat, at the time, I was really quite thrown by that. I didn't hear it. The phone went in the middle of the night. I passed it out. They said it's is Mark there? I just passed it over half asleep. I said, it's for you. I didn't hear what the other person said, but when he put the phone down, I said, what did he say? And he said, I'm going to kill you, you Fenian bastard. At which point, my response was, shouldn't we call the police? To which he said, he looked like, no, of course not. If they're going to do it, they don't phone first, which I thought was a fair point. And he went down to the cellar and got a piece of wooden battening and putting it in the window. So he dealt with it in a very calm way. Afterwards, after he disappeared and I started to suspect what he really was, it did occur to me that maybe that wasn't actually a death threat, and maybe that was a phone call, a set-up phone call from one of his handlers or something to make it appear that there was a risk. And I don't know. I mean, again, it's filling in the gaps. But I accept, I accept some responsibility personally of making pretty stupid choices along the way. However, I would not have been anywhere near any of these people. Certainly that Tut & Shive night with that man on the table with the imaginary rifle sticks in my head to this day. So yeah, he brought me into contact with people who I would not otherwise have been brought into contact with, and that shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have been in my life, full stop, should he?
Thank you. Did you ever witness Mark Jenner involved in any particular criminality during your time together?
Only related to cannabis.
He smoked cannabis.
He did.
I think you say also in paragraph 7.41 to 7.43 of your statement that he smuggled some cannabis seeds back from Amsterdam and then grew cannabis plants in your cellar. Is that right? Yeah. Thank you.
But then destroyed the wrong ones.
Yes, I saw that. I want to move on now to Mark Jenner's withdrawal strategy, or what you would have experienced simply as him leaving.
Yeah.
So at paragraph 60 of his witness statement, he gives a reason for only having filed 4 reports during the period October to December 1999 as being due to scaling down his involvement and feigning depression as part of his exit strategy. Did Mark seem depressed to you in the autumn of 1999?
No.
What was he doing throughout this time?
I mean, this was the time, I'm looking at my statement here as a reminder, but this was the time where we were going to my cousin's wedding, my mum's party, we were going out for lunch with friends. We were planning a trip to America the following year. No, he didn't seem the slightest bit depressed. It wasn't until he came back after the Christmas holidays of that year, the new year, December 1999, that he appeared to change.
And talk to me about that. How did his behaviour change after that Christmas? What was his demeanour once he came back from holiday?
He came back like a different man. He had to go up to Birkenhead because apparently his grandfather had a stroke, and he came back with his beard had grown. He was barely speaking. He'd said he'd had a fight with his stepfather, and there was a whole story, but he was incredibly withdrawn. And then he said he was working up in Luton until March of that year, and then he was going to get a big payout, and that's when we could talk about having the kiddies.
And you mentioned his grandfather and some ill health. I think you wanted to go with him on that visit to see his grandfather, didn't you? And the reason for you being unable to go related to some ill health that your own father had at the time. And your father had a particular deterioration in his health, meaning he needed to be hospitalised, is that right? And you had to go and visit your father, which meant you couldn't go with Mark, is that right? You talk in paragraph 8.19 of your statement about some suspicions you hold about that now.
Yeah.
Just briefly outline what those suspicions are.
So I sigh because I know how mad they sound. And I would just preface it by saying that they're either true, I'm either right, in which case that's deeply shocking, or I'm wrong, and it's indicative of how twisted my brain became after learning who Mark really was. So I mean, without looking at timelines, the exact dates, I think Mark got the call, he got a pager call, I think on the 23rd of December, saying his grandfather had the stroke. I said, I'm coming with you. He said, you can't. I was like, I'm coming with you. My family are Jewish. We really don't care about Christmas. It's fine. I'm coming with you. No, you absolutely can't. A couple of days before this, my dad was in hospital in Surrey with a chest infection. Then on the 24th, which I think was when Mark was going up to see his grandpa, I get a call from my brother saying my dad is being moved to a hospital in Torquay, possibly with a police escort. They wanted to helicopter him out, but it's too windy. And at that point, Mark was like, you've got to go and see your dad. So Mark went up to Birkenhead to see his grandpa, apparently. And my brother and I went to see my dad on Boxing Day. He was in a coma. He had been in a coma, we were told. He was in a coma. And then on the 26th, when we arrive, it's quite a long drive from London, and he'd made a miraculous recovery. And he was speaking and not in the coma. He'd come out of the coma, and he said, he said, I've been in an internment camp in New York. This hospital is an RAF base, and I was helicoptered out. And me and my brother were like, you're hallucinating, Dad. You've been on some very heavy drugs. But, you know, it's a very weird story. And all I can say is, as I said, either the police got very lucky there and something coincidentally happened that meant, okay, I wasn't going to drive Mark mad. I wasn't going with him. I had somewhere else to go for my family. Or
it was somehow engineered by the state.
Yeah.
Is the concern you have.
And my dad had I know it's privacy, but, my dad had a...
Well, don't feel you need to go.
No, but I wouldn't have put it past him. But the story that why would he have done it? What did I think in my made up, in my made up account of what happened here? What was he told? He was told, it's all made up. But my supposition, my theory at the time was, my dad was told, your daughter is involved with a very dangerous man. I didn't tell him he was a police. He's involved with a very dangerous man. He's involved in Irish Republican politics. He's going to this meeting over Christmas. She wants to go with him. She can't go with him. You're going to be fine. We're going to give you a lovely little sleeping pill for 2 days, and you're going to be absolutely fine. And what we were told when my dad was in that coma was that he might have brain damage and be severely, never be the same again. Suffice to say, he lived for another 19 years and was fine.
Thank you. So at this time, going back then to how Mark Jenner was presenting to you, you still lived together in early 2000.
Yeah.
He presented as being increasingly depressed. Is that right? You previously had a partner who had suffered depression, had turned to alcohol and died. That's what you told us about him this morning. Mark Jenner knew that, presumably. How do you feel about his feigning depression as part of his withdrawal strategy as a deliberate tactic now?
It's what they did, isn't it? They exploited and used and manipulated women like me. I mean, he wasn't the only one to feign depression. He wasn't the only one to pull on childhood trauma to explain the sudden need to leave and get his head together. They dehumanised us, they exploited us, they objectified us, they used us. It's shameful. I mean, it's absolutely shameful.
And at the time, you were in a committed, loving relationship so far as you were concerned.
Yeah.
What was the impact of the person you were in a loving relationship with, someone you loved, presenting like that with depression? What impact did that have on you at the time?
Well, a part of me was like, not again, another one. And I remember when he disappeared, I remember my mum saying, I can't remember, something like, maybe he just had to go. And I shouted at her, like, he's not well. You don't understand. He's not well. So I was, my motivation for finding him was because I was very worried about him. I really thought, he was, I believed it. He was, deeply unwell and mentally unstable. He was leaving the house very early. So although we were living together in those from like January when he came back until March when he left the house much earlier, and he came home much later. So we were still sleeping together in the same bed, but he withdrew in every sense, emotionally and physically.
You deal then with the end of the relationship. At paragraph 8.25, you say, on the 15th of March 2000, Mark suddenly moved out, taking all his belongings with him. He left me a letter saying he'd left me.
Yeah.
And in that letter, he told me that I can't pull myself out of this, and I know I'm making you ill and upset and wasting your life away. When I said I loved you, I meant it. I've never deceived or cheated on you. The closer we became, and talk of family planning and settling brought me to think more to myself of Dad and Gran, which drives me even deeper into the hole I'm now in. And he said he was staying in a builder's hostel in Luton, not the van, as he says in his witness statement. And he also left an answer phone message for privacy, a friend of yours telling her he'd had to leave and asking her to look after you.
Yeah.
Is that right? And that letter we have at UCPI 37963, and it's at tab A77. That's the letter that he left you when he left in March, taking all of his belongings with him.
Yeah.
You say at paragraph 8.26, when I returned home and saw the note, I became hysterical and managed to reach Mark on his mobile phone, and he told me he would come back to see me at the weekend.
Yeah.
He did come back.
He did.
On the 18th of March, and he stayed overnight with you that night. And you say in your witness statement that you had sex in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And that he appeared uncomfortable about that.
Yeah.
Specifically about you being physically intimate together.
Yeah.
How did he behave generally during that day and evening?
It was a mixture of quite detached. Well, it was a mixture of detached, but also there was something slightly different about him. He was slightly different. He told a story about being frightened. He slept in the front room, I think. I think that was then when he slept in the front room. He said he was frightened, and so he presented a completely different character. He was a strong, very capable, fearless man, and suddenly he was quite nervous and twitchy and afraid.
You say that he told you he could not give you what you wanted. What did you think he meant by that?
Well, there was some point. I'm not sure it was. Well, I think he meant children. I think he meant he couldn't give me the committed relationship with children that I wanted and the stability that I wanted.
And at this time, when he'd returned on that weekend, what did you think about the relationship at this point? Did you think that you'd persuaded him to stay with you, or did you think the relationship was ending?
No, I thought I'd persuaded him. I thought, I was prepared to do like anything to look after him, really. I was like, forget the politics, don't worry about that lot. And, there are other, because he said he'd thrown in, or maybe this was when he came back, he said, I've chucked it all in. When he came back, I think it was, and he had hardly any stuff. He had like a little kit bag with a few things. And he said, I've given up with all the politics and I've finished with my job. I've chucked my job in. And I saw that I wasn't delighted about it, but I felt that I would be able to somehow, help him get back on his feet and, support him to feel better.
At paragraphs 8.29 and 8.30, you note that his withdrawal strategy notes his managers noting him to be very relaxed at this point, and that when he was inflicting psychological distress on you at the time. Would he have been aware of the distress he was causing you at the moment as someone who
Absolutely.
loved him?
Absolutely. That phone call, that mobile on 8.26, where I managed to reach him on his mobile phone, and he told me, I was hysterical. I mean, one of my friends, who isn't here today, but she was coming round for dinner that evening, and I was just in the most appalling state. And I remember her saying, I remember lots of people saying, just give him some space. Just give him, he needs some space, he'll come back, just give him some space. And I was, I was begging him on the phone to come back. I was really, really devastated because I just saw this sort of, this investment of 5 years of my life with somebody just evaporating in a way that I didn't completely understand at all. I just didn't understand.
At paragraph 8.36 of your statement, you say, I also recall that during this period we spent an afternoon in Stoke Newington Library where Mark searched a motorcycle trip website called the Balkan Run.
Yeah.
And at paragraph 305 of his witness statement, he describes how following his deployment he went on a family trip to Germany and then he went on to Bosnia and Croatia before starting his new posting.
Yeah.
And you say, I now suspect he was planning his post-deployment holiday whilst I was worried sick about his mental state.
Yeah. At the same time as the Balkan Run search at the library, I remember as well, which isn't in here, but as you're saying it, we went into a newsagent, or he went into a newsagent, and he bought an investments magazine, a magazine about investments that had dollar signs and pound signs on. And I was like, what's that about? Left-wing people tend not to have magazines like that. And he said, just indulge my idiosyncrasies. And I thought, okay, you're not well. Like, what's this about? Because he was allegedly getting a payout at the end of this work in Luton in March, and so he was working out what he was going to do with this money. But this Balkan Run thing, when I saw his statement or the document that says Bosnia and Croatia, was really like, audacious is doesn't even go there. It's just, it's beyond, isn't it?
You last saw him on Tuesday, the 11th of April, I think, and he left you another letter.
Yeah.
And if we just look at it, UCPI 37964 at tab A78. So... You say the impact of this on you, you were very upset and worried. It was devastating for you at the time, and you thought that he might take his own life.
Yeah.
He then sent you two very short emails on the 11th of May and the 16th of May, a postcard. And if we just look at that, UCPI 37965, tab A79. That was the postcard, and all it said was the words, I don't want a holiday in the sun, which is the title of a Sex Pistols song, and letter to follow. What did you think when you got that postcard at the time?
I thought it was probably a coded message. I didn't really understand it. I searched, I don't want a holiday in the sun, and that's how I found it was a Sex Pistols song. The last words of which are, don't be waiting for me.
You were concerned about his mental health still?
I was really concerned. I was very concerned about his mental health. I think I was also quite concerned about my loss at this point.
Finally, you say at paragraph 8.44 of your statement, there was a 4-page letter, which you say now was very emotionally manipulative. We just look at that. It's UCPI 37947, and it's at tab A62 of the bundle. In this letter, he apologised again for leaving. He said, I exploded, and going back again after I first went was too painful to carry on as if nothing had happened. I felt very low and vulnerable. And later he says, I couldn't carry on hoping that happy families would evolve and we would be okay, because it wasn't happening. The worry and the stress of failure was making me ill and increasingly desperate. That's why I had to get away. He said he'd bought an around-the-world ticket and was working on a building site in Berlin, and that he'd continue to do casual labouring until he got his head together. And at the bottom of page 2, please, he continued, I realise I have hurt a lot of people through what I've done to you, but I can only say that I am not a cunning, evil bastard, as many must now think, but I felt desperate, alone and frightened. And then on page 3, about 6 lines down, he says, the week before I left, I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. Tears, self-recrimination, guilt, pity, etc. And then at the bottom of page 3, I don't want to think about the past and all that's happened to me, and I am not going to relive it with you. And at the top of page 4, about 6 lines down, I haven't kept in touch because it hurts so much. It has taken me days to write this because I mentally collapse at having to write these things down on paper. How does reading that letter make you feel now?
It just makes me angry. It's such rubbish. And it's like one of those sort of GCSE exams where it says, please try to cover 4 pages of the paper. It's totally made up rubbish. And it's like, and again, you can't help but sort of look at it alongside, I feel the need to. I know this is about Mark and me, but it is also about the systemic nature of this abuse. And you have to look at these letters next to one another because they're like a template. And that begs the question, who's teaching them to write this? You know, there's a bit in one of the letters, it might be the earlier one, where he says something like, I'm sorry for all the things I have done and those I haven't, which is something that Bob Lambert says somewhere, I think, to Belinda. So there's themes and there's bits of these letters that like overlap. So it really is like a really bad sort of, you know, GCSE non-fiction writing exercise.
And as you say in your statement, emotionally manipulative because designed to elicit sympathy in you.
Yes, I'm supposed to be feeling sorry for him.
And you heard nothing from him after this letter?
No, well...
Until you...
No,
yeah.
Not after this letter.
You say in paragraph 9.1 of your statement, that can be taken down, thank you, that you immediately sought to track him down.
Yes.
Why?
Because I wanted to understand. I wanted to know he was okay in the first instance, but then soon after that it was that sudden realisation that in a normal relationship, if somebody leaves you, you normally know their family or their friends, someone, who you can talk to about it. Are they okay? What's happening with them? Why have they left? Even if you can't get to speak to that person, you can get to speak to some people around them. So my first port of call was my address book, which had his grandpa's phone number and address in. And I went to that, and he'd scribbled it out so hard that at that point I was like, oh, you really don't want me to find you? And then that became a reason that I needed to find him.
You wanted to make sense of the sort of extraordinary way in which he disappeared.
Yeah, I wanted answers. I'm like, you know, I come from a reasonably functioning family where you have like relationships with people, and if you fall out with people or you break up with people, there's a conversation about it. You don't just walk out and write a letter and leave it on the table and then do you a favour, come back for a week, behave really weirdly, and then write another letter and walk out again, never to be seen again. It's just, I mean, it's weird. But the thing I would say, though, about that as well, that in a way, what he was using, and so many of these officers have used, is the general emotional incapacity of many men in our society, because if there are many women who have men who walk out on them and they never see them again, it turns out, and what your friends and your family do to protect you in those circumstances is to say, don't waste your time with them, don't go looking for them, you need to move on. And so they're relying on that. They're relying on the fact that you won't search for them because you're better than them, they've told you you're better than them, and you're going to move on with your life. But for me, it absolutely was not, it's not an okay to end a 5-year relationship by just walking out with a letter on the table.
You started to develop suspicions that Mark Jenner was an undercover police officer. How did those suspicions come about?
So there was a phone call at some point after he left from someone he was in one of the groups with, who I think was just asking to speak to him, and I said he's left me, which in itself was quite humiliating. And this person said, "Oh, I think maybe you're going to need to have a chat about that." So I met one of his comrades in a pub, and this person said, "I just want to ask a few questions about a few things to check that he's not a spook." And I was like, "Sorry?" And he said, "I'm sure he's not, but, you know, how did he pay for things?" And just various questions. And I came out of that meeting sort of having sort of done a gestalt shift of chicka spook. That suddenly makes everything make sense. That would explain why I hadn't met his family. That would explain why he doesn't want me to find him. That would explain... It suddenly was like, that's the reason he's gone. And then that became a hypothesis that I then felt the need to evidence and prove.
And so once you held those suspicions following that meeting with his comrade, the motivation for finding Mark Jenner was to prove he was an undercover police officer or some other...
Well, it was a combination, really, because as I said earlier, there was a little part of me, that fantasised that if I could get to speak to him, if I could talk to him, and I knew he was an undercover police officer, I knew he was an agent of the state, I loved him so much that maybe we could still have a future. That wasn't, you know, and he had to leave because his cover was blown, or I had a whole sort of story at that point, and maybe we could, slightly embarrassed to say it, but I will, had this idea, you know, maybe we could go and live in Israel, we could replace one military state with another, we could like just go and live there and have, but, so it was a combination of, yes, proving he was undercover, or letting him know that I knew he was undercover, hence the message that I wrote to him on email, because in that letter you'll see he gave me his Mark Cassidy made up 67 Hotmail address. Mm-hmm. And I, at that point, some point over at that time, I emailed him. I myself set up a Hotmail address using a nickname that he had for me. And I said, and I did nothing else with this email address except this one message which said, "Have you run from it all?" And then I got a tsunami of emails back offering me university diplomas, which I could say more about.
Yes, it's in your witness statement. The comrade of his that you met up with, which prompted your suspicions that he was an undercover police officer or some form of agent of the state, do you remember which group that person belonged to? Which activist group?
Yeah.
Which one?
The AFA Red Action IWCA crossover. And this person said to me at the end of it, "I don't think he is. I think he's a man trapped, and he's done a runner."
Once you had formed those suspicions that Mark Jenner was an undercover police officer and you were trying to track him down, were you any kind of threat to him in any way?
No. I mean, as I said in my witness statement, the only threat that I posed to Mark Jenner and the police was nothing physical. It was just the public exposure.
Paragraphs 9.5 and 9.6 of your statement, you detailed that you called Terry, and we won't use his surname, but you called Terry, who was Mark Jenner's cover employer. Yeah. And you called him in April 2000. What was your intention in calling Terry? What did you hope to achieve?
To ask where he is. Did he know? Mark had told me that he'd come down to London for work through a connection via Terry, and so I'd hoped that Terry would have a contact up north for Mark that he'd be able to put me in touch with, so I could ask some of my questions then.
At paragraph 9.37 of your statement, you discuss the document which records that inquiry of Terry. If we can have it on the screen, please. It's MPS 0749473. It's at tab B4 of the bundle, sir, and it's page 3, please. In relation to this, you say it appears deliberately to mislead. It notes your investigator's inquiry of Terry, but states that you were Mark Metcalfe's girlfriend.
Yeah.
You were never Mark Metcalfe's girlfriend.
I was never Mark Metcalfe's girlfriend, no.
Why do you think it states that you were?
Because these things are written full of lies. I don't know why. I mean, just to cover up, I don't know. This is all like not real nonsense.
It's Mark Jenner again being deceitful and duplicitous, but with his managers.
Yeah, touchy subject. Is relatively relaxed about the inquiry and thinks that it might emanate from me, who occupied a room in his former duff. I mean, what I think is interesting about some of these documents, they can't even keep track of their own lies. In another one, I'm supposed to be his landlady. I didn't occupy a room in his former duff.
And you say that was him deliberately, again, trying to conceal that you, in fact, were living together in a relationship as a couple.
Yes, and I also think it's, it's shocking that nobody, well, I don't really believe it, that's why, but it goes to the it's either malign or incompetent, that nobody in Mark's HM53 or any other managers, they also lacking in emotional intelligence to think that maybe Alison was connected more intimately to touchy subject than maybe he'd told them or than they were admitting to.
Yes, you're questioning why his managers didn't question why a woman not mentioned in any reporting is so interested in tracing him.
Correct.
You carried out, I think, some other searches in relation to trying to find him, for example, with the DVLA. And as you've said, you met with one of his comrades. How was all this affecting you at the time? You were clearly putting quite some time and effort into trying to trace him. Just to describe your mental state and how you were at the time.
It was very dark. I mean, I was obsessed. I was very angry. I was very distressed. I was psychologically very, very disturbed by it. It was a combination of having been abandoned, looking ahead at the rest of my life with none of the plans or hopes or dreams that I'd had suddenly, as I said, evaporated. I was worried about him, and I was completely fixated. I started by just looking for him and wanting to find him, but once I started to believe that he was not who he said he was and he was some kind of state operative, I became fixated on proving that. And I know we'll talk about impact later, but it's not easy to be friends with somebody like that. It's not easy to have a relationship with someone like that. You've got to be, all credit to my friends who put up with it through those years.
Did you tell others about your suspicions about Mark Jenner?
Well, unlike Helen, I told everybody, yeah. Anybody who cared to listen, I told.
What was their reaction?
Well, my mum believed me. My mum was like, if that's what you think, then I believe you. My brother, who won't thank me for this, kind of, was like, look, he left you because you're a pain in the arse. You don't need to construct some James Bond theory to make yourself feel better. I think a lot of people thought I had delusions of grandeur as well. Also like, your funny little tin pot organisation. You think they spied on you. People, for many, many years, not just then, I mean, those were the years when I was really fixated. And there came a point where actually, around end of 2002, 2003, I'd felt like I'd solved the puzzle for my own benefit. I knew the answer. I knew he was special branch. Mm-hmm. And after that, there were the years after that where I had my children and I met new friends through the children, and I would tell this, they'd be saying, you talk about your past and your life, and I would say, not to everyone and not straight away, I tried not to say it straight away, but I would say, my last boyfriend was, a special branch spy, and people would look like, okay, so it's been...
That was very difficult.
It was very difficult, and my dad, I think I've talked about this before, but my dad didn't, my grandma, who you see on the video, she had some mental health problems as a result of the abuse she suffered through her life. And, we're all quite, I have no stigma around mental health. And so we're quite open about it. And my dad was like, you're just like your grandma. It's all nonsense, it's all rubbish. And it was only when, some men male journalists reported it, I think, on the BBC or in the press. And I was walking across Leicester Square, and I remember being on the phone to my dad and said, have you seen it? This is like about 2013 or something, 12, 13. Have you seen it? Have you seen the stuff about Mark in the paper? And he went, oh, literally, in 2012 or 13. Oh, so he really was an undercover police officer. Yeah.
I think you say in your statement that the Relate counsellor, who you've
Yeah.
been to for counselling sessions, believed you when you brought it up with them. I think because he had said so little about his background in counselling sessions. Is that right? And then you go on to say in your statement that over the next 2 years or so, you researched and investigated obsessively, enlisting a friend at the passport office, who told you about a record, and you really spent quite a lot of time investigating and researching. Is that right?
Yeah, I felt like I did a sort of a non-accredited PhD in the secret state during those years. Yeah.
And how did that impact your life? You've touched on it a little bit just now, but all of that time and effort and energy, had this taken over your life?
Yes, I think it definitely should. Yeah, it had a huge psychological impact. I mean, the psychological assessment I had done for the civil claim diagnosed me as having delusional disorder. And that wasn't that the psychologist disbelieved that Mark was an undercover police officer. It was some of the shifts that I'd made, the interpretations, such as the story about my father and my interpretation of the coded messages within those university diplomas emails.
Yes, thank you. You had a private investigator do some investigating. They found very little, you say, but concluded that Mark Jenner had been living under a false identity.
Yeah.
So that was part of the puzzle. You then go on to detail the confirmation of Mark Jenner's true identity and how you confirmed that. So you say at paragraph 10.1 that you were introduced to Helen Steele in August 2003. She had a book which referred to CE Squad, and you concluded that Mark Jenner was Special Branch. And then in 2010, Lisa unmasked Mark Kennedy. And you go on to talk about how in 2011 Helen Steele invited you to join the claim against the Metropolitan Police with other women who had been deceived into deceitful sexual relationships with undercover officers. You revived your research efforts and you found Mark Jenner's Facebook page.
Yeah.
A journalist on the ITV programme suggests The Guardian had a source who confirmed on the 15th of September 2011 that Mark Jenner was SDS targeted at the Colin Roach Centre, and that's how you found out finally his true identity and what he was doing. You go on to say at paragraph 10.7 that through social media and genealogy sites, you then traced a relation of Mark Jenner's, his birth and marriage certificates and those of his children, plus his home address. And you say that on one birth certificate, the father's occupation, in other words, Mark Jenner's occupation, was described as a police officer.
Yeah.
And on another child's birth certificate, the father's occupation was recorded as joiner, and that child was born at a time when he was in a relationship with you. What was the impact upon you of finding out at that time about his marriage and his children, and in particular that a child had been born during the time he was in a relationship with you? Just deeply shocking, and more shocking for his wife. You know, I felt more shocked for his wife, to be honest, and his real family than for myself, for the reasons that I've outlined. I felt that I'd moved on in a way, in some ways. I actually remember, there's an occasion quite early on, and I don't know if this was when his child was born, but there was an occasion where he came home quite early on in our relationship, or came back to my flat, and he was very hyped
and he said that something nearly blew at work. They were fitting an oven in some flats, and it nearly blew. They nearly made the wrong connection with these wires, and it nearly blew. But everything was okay. And I can't help but wonder if that was that day.
You say in your witness statement at paragraphs 10.17 and 10.18 that you would like to know if you were being monitored like Helen Steele was when she was trying to trace her deceiver.
Yeah.
And you find it hard to believe that all your research and inquiries, particularly at the Passport Office and DVLA, hadn't triggered a hostile inquiry or some other form of risk assessment. And that's something you still wonder today.
Yeah.
Just dealing with finding and confronting Mark Jenner then, I just want to ask you a little bit about that. You deal with this at paragraphs 10.23 to 10.25 of your statement. You say that in August 2019 you traced Jenner to a hotel at the end of the Pennine Way by monitoring his Facebook page. And at 10.26 you say you telephoned him and spoke to him.
Yeah.
What was the purpose of calling him to speak to him? What did you hope to get out of that call?
Well, it was 19 years on. He'd posted on the Pennine Way Walkers group that he was doing this walk for the first time on his own. On his own. He did it when he was 16, apparently, with a friend. And I said to my family, well, to my husband, I know where the Pennine Way walk starts. Shall I go up there? And he said, yeah, go up there. But it was actually, our kids were away at that point. They were in a summer camp, and they were coming back the next day. And we were all going on holiday together the following Monday, I think. And I just thought, I'm not going to go up there. But I did keep an eye on what he was doing. The purpose of and when I did eventually phone him, again, I consulted with my family. This is where he is. He's just posted he's staying in this hotel. Shall I ring? And they all said, yeah, absolutely. The purpose was to get some answers. It was the first time I tracked him down and knew where he was in such a way that it was a phone call. I wasn't gonna doorstep him. But I wanted some answers. I hadn't, he just disappeared 19 years earlier. And he obviously knew we brought a civil case. The other thing, we brought this claim in 2011. I think my first press appearance was, about Mark in 2013. I think I'd said in several different places publicly, and particularly after, I think at the press conference, after the Metropolitan Police made their public apology to me, I said, I welcome this apology from the Metropolitan Police. I've yet to receive an apology from Mark Jenner. And so, he knew that, and he knew who our solicitors were. He had his own lawyers. He could have reached out and sent a message through his lawyers had he chosen to, had he had any kind of remorse at all, and he hadn't. So I just thought it was an opportunity that was too good to miss.
Did he apologise to you in that call?
He did not. That I can remember. Afterwards, I told Harriet Wistrich about it, and she said, did he apologise? And I said, I'm not sure he did. And she said, I think you'd remember if he had.
Yes. Did he express any kind of remorse for what he had done?
Well, the exchange was, the first part of the exchange, I said, do you not recognise, he said, who's that? I said, do you not recognise my voice? And he said, how the fuck do you know where I am? Which was gratifying. Did he express any remorse? No, but he began, I said, how are you? Much to my husband's deep irritation afterwards, and anger, I have to say. But I did, and I said, how are you? Because I really wanted him to talk. I did not want to just scream at him and he would have put the phone down. So I asked how he was, and he told me. And it's been terrible for him. Absolutely awful. He's lost everything, he said.
More self-pity?
No, really, it's really been bad. He's lost everything. I'm sure he'll tell you next week. It's been really bad for him. So I don't know what, in a way, your question, what did I expect? It's more what I hoped than what I expected. And it's a reminder, I think, that when you're dealing with people who are professional liars and compulsive liars, that's really what you're going to get. Although sometimes you're going to get bits of truth as well, which makes it even more confusing.
How did you feel after that call?
I was pleased that I'd made the call, but if only for that first moment where he didn't, how do you know where I am? And he probably thought I was standing outside the hotel in Northumbria. So I was delighted that I'd done it. It felt like one of those moments. I think Jackie may have said when she gave her evidence about Bob Lambert, it's a bit like a Chinese meal. You feel full afterwards, but you're not satisfied. The point is, we're never going to be satisfied with these men. I know that now, I think. But he said, one of the things he said at one point because I said, I want to talk to you. I've got a load of questions for you, and they're questions that are not about policing tactics. They're more about, did you really like my brother, or do you remember that? They're those kind of personal questions, some of them, or, I don't know, different questions. And I realised, I'm not going to get those answers.
Afterwards, you sent him a message on Facebook. You set it out at paragraph 10.31 of your statement. He never replied to that.
No. But he didn't delete. But I did say to him afterwards, because I said, if I want to meet, he said he can meet after the inquiry. He said, I want closure too, and I can meet you after the inquiry that he called a tribunal, which did make me wonder if there was also a tribunal that he was involved in. But assuming it was just, he's talking about this. He said, I can meet you after the inquiry. And I said, well, how would I get in touch with you? He said, well, through Facebook. You've got my Facebook. And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, you're going to delete this account after this conversation. And he said, I won't. I promise I won't. And he hasn't. He didn't. But he didn't reply. And he didn't in any way, we've made a documentary since then where I said again that he didn't apologise, and he still hasn't apologised.
Just looking then a little bit more about the impact this has had on you. Finding out that Mark Jenner was an undercover police officer, firstly, what impact has that had on your political activity?
Well, until about 2011, it involved me stepping back. I had a moment, I had this sort of, this realisation or sense that everything was controlled, that if Mark was involved in the Colin Roach Centre and John Dines was involved in, the groups Helen was involved in, then the likelihood was that every single left-wing group was going to be surveyed by these undercover officers. And therefore, what's the point of doing anything? Because, they're watching you all the time.
And what about the impact of finding out on your personal relationships?
So there was psychological impact at the time that I've mentioned, the delusions, the paranoia. I became very hardened and very angry. I think also there was physical impact, which I forget about every time, and it is not in my statement, and it was also my own gullibility. But Mark had a cold sore, and I said, that's a cold sore, and he said, no, it's not. And I kissed him, and I've now got cold sores because of him. So that's a physical thing. It had an impact on my mother, on being a mother. I was a much older mother than I wanted to be. It also impacted on the type of mother I was, which I think actually benefited my children in some ways, but it didn't benefit my career. I was very conscious of the notion of abandonment, of having been abandoned. I didn't want to abandon my children. I didn't want to separate from my children. I think I had a form of separation anxiety because, in my head, bad things can really happen. And that had an impact on my career because it meant that I took about, 5-6 years where I didn't work. So it's very difficult to make those years up in terms of experience. And in terms of my relationships, I think there was one very good friend I had during those years who she had a child, a very young child, and I remember going to see her soon after Mark had disappeared and I had my theories, literally with files that I wanted to go through. I wasn't interested in her child, and she was very hurt by that, and that's a friend who I lost, and I regret that. It's had an impact on my partner, a big impact on my partner, who is unable to come here today. He's unable to come and see Mark give evidence because he feels he'll heckle and shout. He doesn't understand how people can sit here and not shout out and get very angry. It's probably had an impact on my children in a way. They've had to live with this, and I've had to do that double thing of, yes, if you're in trouble, you have to trust the police, but actually look what the police are doing. And I think one of the other things in terms of my children as well, and myself and all my other relationships, because of this lying thing, I've got a ridiculously high standard of the need for truth, which in the real world is quite difficult, particularly when you've got teenage children. You know, apparently they need to lie sometimes, or they need to keep things from you, and I struggle with that. And also for myself, as I say, in the real world, sometimes you can't tell every bit of truth all the time, and I struggle with that. And so there's many, lasting impact. The other thing I would say about the impact is, because as I've said, I think Mark has sadistic tendencies, that until today, really, and I'm prepared to talk about this today, but generally, I don't want to talk about the impact because I don't want to give him, and I don't want to give the police the sadistic gratification, the individuals, the gratification that they have harmed us to that extent. You know, women like me are survivors, and it's a bit like in the civil claim. To get a civil claim, you have to admit damage, for the inquiry, I understand you have to understand the impact, but it's not something that I feel comfortable talking about.
Thank you. Just in terms of your husband, I think you've talked about having had difficulty in trusting people. You are now married, and as you've said, you have children. I think, though, the fact that your husband was a childhood friend, someone you had known and was part of your community growing up, was something which enabled you to form an intimate relationship with him, because you could be absolutely certain that he was who he said he was. Is that right? Yeah. So that's affected you in that way, in that relationship even? Yeah,
very much so.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about the impact of finding out and of having been in the deceitful relationship with Mark Jenner that you think the chair should know before I move on?
No, I think I've covered those.
Thank you. I just want to look at some of the inaccuracies you point out in Mark Jenner's witness statement. And you deal with these at paragraph 11 of your statement. So at 11.2, you have the cipher list there. There's a privacy redaction, but you say that privacy had never lived at your flat. You know who's under the redaction, is that right?
Yeah.
At 11.3, you say you were never in an intimate relationship with Bert. Is that right?
I was not, no.
And at paragraph 11.4, everything about Mark Jenner living with Bert or your flat being his, as in Bert's, is complete fiction. Is that right?
Yeah.
At paragraph 11.6, about Jenner moving in with, and again, there's a privacy redaction. You can check the cipher list for that paragraph 11.6. He is everything about him moving in with that person is fiction. Mark Jenner was back living with you at the point in time that this concerns. We can look at the document. It's MPS 0749473, and it's at tab B4, sir, of the bundle. So he was living at your address, which is redacted out there, but is in the middle of the page. That can be taken down. Thank you. At paragraph 11.8, you deal with the suggestion that Helen Steele might take over as the Colin Roach Centre's full-time worker, and you say that seems an incredible suggestion. She wasn't a member, she was an anarchist, and you doubt that Mark Jenner ever met her. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't remember him meeting her.
You point out that the Colin Roach Centre closed in October 1998. So when he says he reported on the centre throughout his entire deployment, that's wrong because his deployment ended much later. I want to then ask you a little bit about S.
Yeah.
S was Mark Jenner's wife at the time he was deployed and in a relationship with you, now his ex-wife.
Yeah.
At paragraph 12.7, you detail how S made contact through your solicitors in 2016 and you met up, is that right?
Yeah.
And at 12.8, you say, and you have since met many times, is that
Yeah.
right? Can you describe the relationship between the two of you now?
I mean, you'll hear from her tomorrow. She's an incredible woman. She's a woman of deep integrity. She's extremely kind. She's very private. And, you know, and she's been absolutely right. We met, she's been right about kind of not sharing too many stories. You know, we haven't talked in great detail about the way he did it, if you like. Like, you know, I know that he went home when he told me he was going to work, he was going home, and when he told her he was going to work, he was coming home with me. So we've talked about that. There are some, you know, strange things in terms of some coincidences about some gifts that he gave me, and I think he gave her, but I'll leave her to talk about some of that. It's one of the weirdest, not weirdest, but it's kind of one of the more unusual elements of this, and I wish more of the wives, I understand why they're not, but I wish more of the wives of these officers were brave enough, like S, to come forward and testify to this inquiry, because they have, you know, their story is the mirror image, if you like, of ours. I mean, they are also the victims of the institutionalised misogyny and sexism that we were victim to, in some ways even worse, because they met some of these managers, they knew some of these people in the police hierarchy. They also were exploited and manipulated. And, you know, what can I say? She's a lovely woman.
Thank you. Finally, then, at paragraph 12.5 of your statement, you say, I believe collective and institutionalised objectification, dehumanisation and abuse of women was fundamental to the undercover officers' success in the field. I hope the inquiry will recognise this and make a finding of institutionalised sexism and misogyny in the police.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about your views on that?
No, I mean, you know, again, you know that I've got a little statement to read which does
Yes.
cover some of that, so it's covered in that, I think.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have for you. I know that you have a statement you would like to read. Now is your opportunity to do so.
So I hope you'll indulge me if, as an ex-English teacher, I begin my final remarks with a quote from a Shakespearean revenge tragedy. In Act 3, Scene 1 of Titus Andronicus, after Titus has learned his daughter had been raped, her hands cut off and her tongue cut out, he discovers his 2 sons have been murdered. Encouraging revenge, his brother Marcus says to him, "Now is the time to storm. Why art thou still?" To which Titus replies, "Ha, ha, ha." Then Marcus asks, "Why dost thou laugh? It fits not with this hour." And Titus's answer, "Why? I have not another tear to shed." I quote this exchange in the context of today's evidence to introduce some themes that I hope help unpack the complexity of emotion involved in being part of this shocking undercover policing scandal and the ongoing investigation into finding the truth. It illustrates a moment where laughter meets despair, a sensation with which I'm all too familiar. It's through humour and laughter that I, and many of the other women affected, have coped with much of the horror of our experience. Whether it's mocking the James Bond fantasies of these secret policemen, or giving them rude nicknames, or deriding their fictional reporting, or their grade D O-level style creative writing of love letters and poetry, we minimise their emotional impact and cut their grandiose self-importance down to size. I identify also with not having another tear to shed. The time for crying about what Mark Jenner did to me has long passed. Like Titus's daughter Lavinia, women like me were violated. By contrast, however, we have not been silenced. We have collectively transformed our pain into organising to expose and evidence this state-sponsored wrongdoing. This work is not yet finished. The law has not changed, but we have come a very, very long way from the time I was whispering to my friend my paranoid suspicions in the back garden. I am deeply grateful for the support, solidarity and brainpower of the women involved in our group, Police Spies Out of Lives, our wider campaigning partners and our legal team. Thanks also to my friends and family, many of whom have come along today and who've been considered collateral intrusion by the Metropolitan Police. Like many others who have been personally impacted by these state-sponsored con men, I have followed the inquiry closely from the outset, and with each evidential hearing that passes, I have become ever more convinced of the need for legislative change, particularly to the laws on consent and to those governing covert human intelligence sources. The inquiry's recommendations will be its legacy. I hope our voices will be listened to when these recommendations are drafted. Sex by deception must become a criminal offence. The Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Act, or CHIS Act, must be overhauled. Immunity from prosecution must be replaced with a defence. There must be more judicial oversight of authorisations, and there simply must be limits on what crimes undercover operatives can be authorised to commit. No torture, no rape, no murder. It's hard to believe it even needs saying. Despite what we've been told, the Human Rights Act is not protecting women like me. So these limits must be explicit. The institutionalised sexism, misogyny and racism in the police, evidenced by these deployments, must be identified. And those who have received honours and commendations for their work must have them removed. This is what being held to account looks like. What has happened to us at the hands of these on-duty, taxpayer-funded, narcissistic, cosplaying, manipulative men must never happen to other women again. To return to Titus Andronicus, unlike him, I do not seek revenge on those who have harmed us, but unfiltered truth and genuine remorse. I listened to the evidence last month from the Black Family Justice Campaign spied on, and was disturbed by the intergenerational trauma recounted by family members testifying. Similarly, the evidence of families of deceased children whose identities were stolen. I was made all too aware of the responsibility of having contributed to bringing this scandal to public attention. Had we not done so, these bereaved families would not have been required to relive, in this public setting, their most private grief yet again. But unlike the numerous police officers who have given the weak excuse that none of these documents were ever supposed to have been made public, arguing that if secrecy had been maintained, we would all have been saved this pain, I think it's better that we do know about the spying we've been subjected to. The way to right this wrong is not to cover it up further, but to come clean. So I have one plea. If all the undercover officers and their managers who are yet to testify starting with Mark Jenner next Monday, if they want to show they are truly sorry rather than simply say they are, they must dig down into their memories, be honest about their failings, unearth their deeply buried consciences, and tell the whole truth. No more excuses, no more amnesia, no more covering each other's backs, no more secrets and lies.
So may I ask you to rise for 5 minutes while we check the Rule 10 and re-examination situation?
Certainly, you may need longer than 5 minutes, but you may have as long as is needed. At this stage in the proceedings, as I'm sure you know by now, we break for a while so that anyone who may have questions to put to counsel for the inquiry can do so, and she can, if she thinks it right, put them to you. May I ask you a question about the statement? Would you mind providing a copy of it to us?
Of course.
Thank you. Then I'll rise for at least 5 minutes, but however long is reasonably needed.
Thank you.
And also, it is
time for a break.
time for the transcribers to have a break as well, so I think...
Should we take 15?
Well, at least 10.
Great.
Guys.
Sir, thank you for the time. There are, in fact, no Rule 10 questions and no re-examination for the witness. So that concludes the proceedings with this witness today.
Thank you. May I thank you personally for the very great trouble to which you have gone and for the live oral evidence which you've given to me. Forgive me, I must speak up. I'll repeat what I've said. May I thank you personally for all the trouble to which you have gone and for the live oral evidence which you have given to me. I hope I may say without offence to you or any other witness who's had to go through the same task, that the humour and insight which you showed in your evidence in no way diminished its force. I listened with care to the statement that you read at the end, and which I will now have a copy of. I'm not so sure that what Titus Andronicus said is exactly right, but it combines human characteristics that I do have well in mind. As you probably know, I am not going to conclude the inquiry. I am merely reporting on what happened in the Metropolitan Police in the SDS. But I will not refrain from expressing an opinion about what happened there when I report. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We will meet again tomorrow at 10.
Thank you, sir.
All rise.